Bionic 6, ooh, ooh. Welcome to Pegwarmers. I'm Kevin, and I'm here to talk about toys. Today, I'm talking about the LJN Bionic 6 toy line, and its accompanying cartoon show to some degree. In 1986, LJN released the Bionic 6 toy line that contained 13 figures, a playset, a bunch of vehicles, and the figures were made out of die-cast metal. What an interesting idea. Kenner had done the chromed Silverhawks with the tagline partly metal, partly real. Bionic 6 had die-cast action figures with plastic arms and plastic thighs, many of those being see-through plastic, translucent plastic to show off the bionics of these figures. And such an interesting concept. Made them very different from other toy lines on the market, but somehow they didn't survive. Bionic 6 was up against some very steep competition from other toy lines. They didn't really stand out on the shelves, I guess. And with some litigation going on with the owners of LJN, the company that owned LJN, dealing with Entertech water guns that were too realistic, the toy line just kind of vanished as LJN crumbled. The storyline for the show and the toy line is based on sort of the high concept of the $6 million man and the Bionic Woman having a family. I don't think it was actually ever pitched for the character of Jack Bennett to actually be Lee Majors' character of Steve Austin, but just the concept of it. Like, what if we had these bionic couple with bionic kids? And they created this really cool family-based show of superheroes, all with their own unique powers. Many of them shared powers, like speed and strength, but there was always one person that was the fastest, one person was the strongest, one person that, could do each thing to the best of their ability. The toy line had these really cool commercials that looked like it was in a foundry with liquid metal getting poured into molds, and the molds would open, and the Bionic 6 figures were inside, and then with a dissolve, they'd be painted, and through stop-motion animation, they would move to do their bionic motion. Bionics on! But unfortunately, the toys can't actually move that way. They have joints, like straight-arm G.I. Joe figures, where they can't actually rotate at that position. So it's a little bit of false advertising. And actually, I was always kind of disappointed that they couldn't do their Bionics on hand symbol. They have rings molded on their fingers, and that would always get pressed against like a plate on their wrist, almost like a Power Ranger morpher. It's henshin time, we gotta transform. I need to apologize because I recorded this video. I retained the audio, but lost the video to most of it. So I have reshot a few segments and the intro, and I'm going to rely heavily on B-roll throughout to kind of cover the lack of video of me. Let me know if that improves the video or makes it worse. They released 13 figures for the toy line, one season of the cartoon show, and it just didn't go over that well. Bionic 6 got lost in the shuffle between the tons of competition that were out on the toy shelves in that moment, as well as some litigation that took place with the parent company that owned LJN at the time, based on some of the realistic Entertech water guns that had been sold a year or two before. There just wasn't the support for this line that it needed, even though so much care was put into the show. The animated part of this was fantastic. The theme song stuck in my head every time I think about it. The designs of the characters, they all looked so fantastic. Great voice acting. And the toys are decent. I think they suffer from being die-cast. They have not quite all the articulation I wanted in a toy from this era, and they generally have pretty limited paint apps on their faces, which kind of hurts some of the figures. Last week on Pegwarmers, I talked about kind of focusing on the wrong toy line at the York Toy Show Expo. My buddy Trick Treat was selling some Bionic 6 figures he had recently bought, and gave me a great deal on them. I snatched them up because I want to be able to compare them with my Bionic 6 figures and see if they're in better shape. Bionic 6 is tricky. With the die-cast metal, the paint does chip off of them pretty easily when you play with them. So I want to compare and see what I want to keep, and also really hone in on what I need for this line. I'm basically trying to collect the figures. I wouldn't mind having some of the other parts of the line, but it's pretty hard to get the figures, let alone their accessories, and then on top of that, to think about vehicles and playsets is a lot. We're going to start with Jack Bennett, Bionic 1. He's the father of the team. He has translucent plastic in his upper arms and in his thighs, die-cast metal in his torso and his feet. The die-cast metal in the feet do sometimes help them stand a little bit because it has a little weight at the bottom, but also those torsos make them a little top-heavy too, so Bionic 6 is a mixed bag on how well they stand. Jack came with a scuba diving backpack and a little laser weapon, I don't know, almost looks like the Filmation Ghost Zapper or something. Now, both of these accessories happen to be reproductions. I do actually have his real backpack, and I was having trouble putting it on, so I ended up forcing the reproduction one on there just because I wanted to kind of be able to see how it fit. So this is the original backpack. This is the repro. The original one is slightly more orange, maybe. As far as flexibility of the plastics, the repro backpack's maybe slightly more flexible, making it a little bit easier to put on the figure. I have this original one because a friend of mine, a boy named Jason Kime that I was friends with as a kid, had several Bionic 6 figures, and I thought this scuba suit was really cool, the scuba pack, because you could like put it on a G.I. Joe also. And eventually he just left it at my house, and it's been with my G.I. Joe accessories for decades. So eventually I moved it in with this collection, and as we go through, I'll talk a little bit more about these reproduction weapons. I am not a huge supporter of repro stuff, but I did purchase a mostly complete set, I guess, of repro Bionic 6 weapons at one point, and then kind of regretted it. So I have 2 copies of Jack Bennett, and the copy that I just got from my buddy Trick Tree, I knew the chest was in pretty good shape, and mine has a pretty nice chunk taken out of it. There's a slight variation in the hair color on these two, but they both look pretty good with face details, although the one I got from Trick might be missing an eyebrow. So mine, I kind of like the face paint on it better, but his torso is way better. And then their legs are about similar, with a little bit of wear, but in decent shape. So I do think that the figure from Trick is the upgrade and will be the one that stays in my collection. In the show, Jack has basically the powers of the $6 Million Man. He's fast, he's strong, he can see better than most people. Just sort of an all-around super guy. And that's kind of what you see with the team here. They're all better than your average person, but there's always somebody with the best version of everything, like the strongest guy, the fastest guy, even though everybody's pretty fast or pretty strong. So next up, I've got Mother 1, or Helen. She had ESP and telepathy type powers. Here she's seen with the repro backpack harness thing on. I cannot actually fasten this. The repros are a very hard plastic that doesn't really work for some of these belts. It doesn't really fit on her, so I probably just won't display it on her anyway. And she looks pretty good without it, but she's one of those figures where they used the same color for her hair as they did for her face details. And so her face almost looks blank. The light brown eyes and eyebrows just kind of don't show up. She's mostly red with some yellow paint details on her. And I like that all the figures are molded with a ring on their finger because that's how they activate their powers. But one of my biggest disappointments with these figures growing up, they don't have swivel arm battle grip like G.I. Joes were after the first year where you can bring their arms in, because the Bionic 6 characters actually put their rings up to their forearms to transform, and these toys can't do that. Next up, we're going with Meg, or Rock 1. I got a Meg from Trick that has a broken arm, and I kind of wondered if it was from some kid trying to force her arm over to do the Bionic on feature, which they can't actually do. And Trick mentioned to me that she's riveted in the back, so you can't, like, swap out her parts. You couldn't use her to repair somebody else. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And when I was looking at my Meg that I've had since I was pretty much a kid, her back is screwed together while this one is riveted. And I thought that was interesting. I don't know if that's an early and later variation of the line, and something I haven't really seen mentioned anywhere on the internet. I got this Meg figure at a yard sale, a local flea market, when I was a kid I don't know, maybe 1988, 1989, something like that. And I used to pretend she was Quick Kick's girlfriend a lot, and that she was good at karate, and she was on the G.I. Joe team. The belt she has on here with her little boombox, or not boombox, but Walkman. This is actually the repro one. It's very hard plastic. Her original one is actually holding my Kenner Endor Luke's poncho down, because I'm missing his belt. And at some point in time, before I really got into collecting Bionic 6 stuff, and I probably only had 1 or 2 figures, her belt became Luke's belt, because I was actively trying to collect and display my Kenner Star Wars guys. So eventually, I'll get Luke's belt and be able to give her her belt back and get rid of this repro one that's on there. But I do like her, you know, if I can put the repro one on, just to kind of make them look a little bit more complete, to show them off, I put that on her there. My Meg does have some chipping on her torso, so she wouldn't be a terrible one to replace. It's not so bad that I can't stand it, and really the one that I got from Trick is about the same quality. I also think the tan paint used on her eyebrows and eyes is lighter on the riveted one I got from Trick than the one that I owned. I also own a carded Meg, but she's miscarded on an Eric card back. So that's totally a factory error. It's the only carded Bionic 6 figure I currently own, although I've owned a couple other ones and opened them. I will not be opening the mispackaged Meg. So speaking of Eric or Sport 1, I've got a fairly rough Eric here. His paint's not too bad, but his one knee is really loose. He has the repro baseball glove and bat on. I remember as a kid thinking it was so neat that he came with a baseball glove and a bat, which is kind of silly, but that was what his gimmick was. But just the idea of having these sort of mundane accessories in G.I. Joe scale, or action figure scale, it seemed really neat to me. Sport 1's power is that he's really good at sports, from what I can tell from the cartoon. He can hit laser blasts with his bat. A little bit of research I did said he has electromagnetic powers. That wasn't really clear from the episode I watched recently, and I don't remember specifically what his power was from when I was a kid, other than being good at sports. Meg, on the other hand, who I didn't mention earlier, was really fast, and I do remember that from the cartoon. She also had little, like, sonic blasters that would shoot out from her shoulder. That almost makes me think that the Helen backpack could have been Meg's, because it sort of has those shoulder mount pieces on it. I don't really know what gear Helen used. I just remember her being a marine biologist and, you know, having, like, the telepathy and premonitions and stuff like that. Sort of a Jean Grey type character. So there's 2 figures from the Bionic family that I'm missing that I really do want to get. Bungie, who was Karate 1. He was the foster child from Japan who knew karate and was super agile and super good at karate. And then the last member of the Bennett family, who was their adopted son from Africa, JD, who went by the codename IQ. He was the strongest on the team, but also the smartest on the team. He has a cowboy hat accessory, as well as some, like, clip-on computer things, but I don't really remember him wearing a cowboy hat in the cartoon show. So I'm not sure if that was just something they thought would be cool for the toy or make the toy sell. Or maybe he did wear it in the cartoon some and I just don't remember it. This guy's not in the best shape paint-wise, but I'm still super happy to have him. This is Fluffy. Fluffy is the robotic gorilla companion of the Bionic 6 team. Kind of hung out around their house, seemed like he was a nanny or a housekeeper, ate aluminum cans, but did occasionally save the day. A good friend of mine, Paul, who I've known forever, mostly collects video game stuff, does have some toy things, and often resells toys. He realized he had 2 Fluffies, the only Bionic 6 figure he really wanted in his personal collection, and so he sold me the second one, and super happy to have him in my collection. I went on a Bionic 6 collecting spurt many years ago. I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, something like that. And I was trying to get the team. I actually made it a goal one year at RetroCon that I was going to get at least one item towards my vintage Bionic 6 collection. And so then I started looking around on eBay and stuff, and I came across this lot of accessories, and it seemed like a good price because Bionic 6 stuff just is really rare. And it crossed my mind that they might be reproductions, but I wasn't really sure, and I felt like I couldn't pass up on it, especially because Bionic 6 accessories are so hard to find, and if these were the real thing. It didn't specifically say anywhere in the listing that they were reproductions. When I got them, they definitely were. It wasn't a complete accessory set because I didn't get, like, Scarab's bolt cutter. I don't think I got both of JD's clip-on arm pieces. It's mostly complete, but not quite complete. But I have most of the accessories in a bag here. I would display some of the reproduction ones on the guys, even though I don't really like them that much, just to try to make some of the characters look more complete. You know, Eric looks better with the glove and the bat. While I was doing all that hunting on eBay, I would occasionally come across a Bionic 6 figure on a really messed up card. So, for instance, the glove here had a giant, like, clearance sticker or something on him that got ripped off. Also, can I point out how weird this pattern is on the bad guy card backs? So my copy of the glove, which I forgot that he was case fresh, is really, really pristine, and obviously he has his real accessories. But he actually has a lot of flashing on his plastic leg here that's not super appealing. So I did get a really nice glove from Trick Treat, and I am almost debating keeping Trick's glove because it doesn't have that flashing on the leg, but the case fresh one doesn't have any paint rub on his little grenades, so it's tough. I'm definitely going to keep the case fresh one, even though, you know, he does have a little bit of weird flashing on his leg. Here are my two Dr. Scarabs. The one with the reproduction belt on is the one that has been in my collection for a while. These guys are both in pretty good shape. I did have a Scarab at one point that was super yellow and gross, but replaced him with this one. Both of these guys are in pretty good shape. There's a tiny little bit of paint wear on the reflector piece on Scarab's head here on the one from Trick. But they are pretty comparable. They both have a few chips on their boots. The one from Trick might actually have slightly better boots. So it's a little bit of a toss-up there. Everything else seems pretty much the same, although when I compare looking for like a variant or anything like that, I don't see any real differences. Madam O is another figure that I bought off eBay, carded to open. I think I paid maybe $40 for her, which I felt was an okay deal to have her with her accessories. And her bubble was completely crunched and like cracked. The card back's got a crease in it here. So I opened her up and have a complete Madam O with great paint. So the reproduction versions of her accessories are still in the bag, and I don't need them. She's got a funny gas mask look to her with a backpack with tanks on it. She's got a laser weapon that doesn't quite fit in her hand well. Bionic 6 accessories are kind of terrible. And then the last Bionic 6 figure I have in my collection is Chopper. And I was actually thinking that Chopper might be the one that I had taken out of the package. I forgot that the glove was the other one I had taken out of the package. But my Chopper's in pretty good shape, other than he's got one, like, floppy knee. But his paint's in pretty good shape. And this is a repro accessory here. He's got a little laser weapon that clips onto a backpack of sorts, so it can sit over his shoulder. Now, in the cartoon show, he most often used a chain as a weapon. I guess they didn't want to give him some sort of, like, whip accessory, so he has this little laser weapon that sits on his shoulder. I guess that's cool. But he's in pretty good shape. And then there's only one other bad guy. So Clunk, who kind of looks like a melting Stay Puft Marshmallow Man or a guy made of milk, is the last bad guy I need. When I look at the back of the package, Meg almost looks like her wrist can turn or her forearm can turn. Like she could do the Bionic 6 thing, but that just doesn't happen with that figure. Eric's got his bat and mitts. JD's got his hat on and his two computer terminals. Fluffy with no accessories. Jack's holding the mask with the backpack on, and he's got his little blaster thing actually clipped on his arm. Helen's wearing her backpack, and it almost looks like there's a paint app on it. And then Bungie's got a little blaster strapped to his arm. Now, these are probably prototype figures. These might have been the figures that went to Toy Fair, so, oftentimes packaging figures look a little different. We've got the mechanic. He's got his belt on. Glove has his glove and a laser weapon. Madam O has her laser weapon and her backpack. Scarab is holding... It's hard to tell what it is, actually. It almost looks like a blaster, but I think it's like a shears or bolt cutters and his belt. Chopper has his laser backpack on, and then Clunk on the end there has a gauntlet item with like a finger gun. I have the repro version of that right here. A little bit of a Thanos gauntlet with like a finger laser. The figures are broken down to the Bennett family and Dr. Scarab's evil minions of destruction. Collect them all. 2 proofs of purchase points. Shall we read the little bio on the back? It's just sort of the story for the whole line. While leading a scientific expedition across the Himalayas, Bionic Man Jack Bennett and his wife Helen and the 4 teenage children, Meg, Eric, DJ, and Bungie, are attacked by a band of bloodthirsty creatures. Jack Bennett fights to protect his family, but the struggle triggers an avalanche, which leaves them all trapped beneath an ancient glacier. Under the glacier, they come upon a strange form of energy, like nothing has ever been seen before. It causes Jack's family to sink into a sleep-like trance, but his bionics make him immune. The brilliant Professor Amadeus Sharp finally comes to their rescue. In his secret laboratory, Professor Sharp gives each of the Bennetts special bionic powers. The Bennett family is together again. Bionics on! However, now they are the Bionic 6. Together they fight the evil Dr. Scarab and his minions of destruction, Glove, Mechanic, Madam O, Clunk, and Chopper, in a continuous effort to keep the world safe and free. I don't keep a lot of card backs, but I had to save these because they're vintage. I'm not keeping a lot of modern card backs, and I know eventually the modern stuff will be vintage, but, these ones, like I said, I couldn't get rid of them. There's definitely a very different shade of yellow between the card backs here, so again, not sure if there's anything different there. They both say Assortment 3800 on the front, so I assume these would be the same release. 1986, 1986. There are some slight differences between these card backs. It's very strange. There's some spacing. Figures are made of both die-cast metal and plastic parts. Figures are made of both die-cast metal and plastic parts, but there's like a Made in China line added in here on the Madam O one. So again, maybe Madam O is a second wave. Does she have a screw in her back? We are doing some exploring here. Try and take her backpack off without breaking it or scratching her paint. She has a screw in her back. I did want to check Helen. She's the only other slender one. She has screws that don't even seem like they're embedded in her back very far. Yeah, I don't know what the story is there with this riveted Meg figure, but if you own any Bionic 6 figures, especially the ladies, check them. Leave me a comment down below. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I don't think it's going to matter to anybody because it's Bionic 6. But I'm just curious. Do you have riveted or screwed together Bionic 6 figures? I've never tried to take a Bionic 6 figure apart, and I probably never will unless I found a beater one. Like this Meg with the broken arm. If she was screwed together, I would consider trying to take her apart just to see what's going on, what the articulation internal mechanisms are like there. What the Bionic 6 figures have, if you've never seen one, swivel heads like the original 82, 83 G.I. Joes. They have shoulders that spin around and move out to the side, like an 82 G.I. Joe, and the straight arm elbow, like a G.I. Joe. They have a swivel at the waist. They have like a T-bar construction similar to G.I. Joe that lets the legs move forward and backwards and out to the side. And then they have a joint that lets their knees bend about 90 degrees. So they're pretty similar to a straight-arm G.I. Joe in articulation. They just happen to have the die-cast metal in the middle of their body and in their feet, plus some translucent plastic to make them look super fancy and futuristic. As I mentioned, there is a full lineup to this line. There was a playset, a secret headquarters that had statues guarding a secret door, and you push a figure down and they would spring open. I have never seen this playset in real life ever. I mean, I maybe saw it at retail when I was a kid and don't remember it, but I have never come across it at a toy show. I didn't know anybody that had it. I've seen some videos of it. It does exist, obviously. The two vehicles I probably come across the most are the quad and the dirt bike. These are small one-man vehicles for the Bionic 6 team. The teenagers would generally ride them in the cartoon. They're pretty cool, and they could actually fit inside the team's van, which was called Mules. The van was like a gray van with the Bionic 6 logo on the back panels, the side panels. The ramp in the back could go down so the dirt bike could go inside, and the front split open so the quad could come out of there. A boy I went to school with named James Schuster had the Mules, the van from Bionic 6, and it has a big 6 on the side, and I remember pretending it was April's news van when I would play at his house. The front split open, and you could wedge April in there and close it back up. It wasn't really in scale to Ninja Turtles toys at all, but there was no news van at the time, and since it was gray and had Channel 6 on the side, or 6 on the side, it felt very much like it worked well for that. Yeah, I loved playing with that van at his house. The Mules. It was cool, but I never see it. Again, I don't see this stuff at shows. The Mules was pretty cool, and I think once you have it, you really need the quad and the dirt bike because they fit in it and stuff. But I don't have any of the vehicles. There were 2 laser interactive toys from this line, 2 like flying chairs, a throne for Dr. Scarab, and then a Bionic 6 flying chair vehicle. And they could shoot laser lights at each other, and they would interact. LJN had used that technology in the Thundercats, Cat's Lair playset. There was also stuff like that for Brave Star. So it was kind of like a popular trend at the time. And I totally didn't finish talking about all of the bad guys, because I missed the mechanic. We'll get to him in a second. The last figure from the line, who I somehow skipped, he was, I think the first Bionic 6 figure I ever got to play with was the mechanic. There was a boy named Jason Kime that my mom used to babysit for after school until his mom picked him up when she got home from work. And she would often bring him a figure on Fridays, which I might have been slightly jealous of. But I remember her bringing him some Bionic 6 figures, the mechanic and Jack. And that was some of the first access I had to those figures, because he would often bring them back to my house the next week to play with, and we would use them with G.I. Joes a lot. The mechanic is this big, clunky, doofy guy, but the figure looked really strong to me, because he had big muscles and a big build, and I used to really like pretending that he could just crush a G.I. Joe, just really beat up on them. So I have the mechanic here with his real belt on. And then I have this one from Trick, and this mechanic is the one I bought at RetroCon one year when my goal was to find a Bionic 6 toy I didn't have. They're both not perfect, but they're also both not terrible. My figure, the one that has been in my collection the longest, has some pretty gnarly paint wear on his feet. The one from Trick has a little bit of a big chip on his one back shoulder, but of course back shoulder's not going to show up that much on display. So I kind of like Trick's mechanic better, so I'm probably going to switch the belt over and then part ways with my old mechanic. I remember these accessories being fairly rubbery as a kid, and the belt I have from Meg is pretty rubbery, but this mechanic belt, I don't think it's a repro because it's dirty for sure. It looks like it's been aged, but it does not really want to come off too easy, and I don't want to rip it, so I'm going to have to play around with that some. I have some really great memories at a birthday party from kindergarten or maybe preschool where we played Bionic 6, and different kids were different characters. There was one girl there, Stacy Taxon, who I think was being Meg and Helen. She would switch back and forth as needed. I think I might have been Mechanic. He's the big, strong, dopey guy, but I thought his figure was really cool, and it was one of the first figures from Bionic 6 I ever got to play with. But I specifically remember this girl being on the deck at the back of this house where the party was, having pretend premonitions as Mother One, and team, I need you, family, I need you, and just kind of having a great time playing out there. I don't remember too many details of what the adventure was or who all the other friends were that played, but it's just really kind of fun when you can remember those kind of things from your childhood. So I'm putting together a list of stuff I'm trying to track down this year. There's a lot of stuff I'm missing in my collection. I have lists of G.I. Joe accessories and file cards I need. I have a pretty long list of Cops accessories I need. And a lot of this stuff is hard to find. I mean, Bionic 6 accessories I mentioned are impossible to find. Last week I mentioned I'm looking for a 1986 Xandar figure. I'm adding JD, Bungie, and Clunk to my list of figures that I'm actively hunting for this year. I'm trying to get a consolidated list in my head So instead of going and just sort of like not knowing what I'm looking for, I have something very specific in mind. Other things I'm looking for this year: Molecular from the Silverhawks. I need a gun for the Vector. Last week I showed off that I got a new weapon for one side, a laser for the side fins on the Vector. I need one more because one was broken, the barrel, and one, the clip broke on it, so I really need both of those to repair my buddy's childhood Vector. And then I'm also adding to the list, I'm looking for 1985 Alpine's rope and grappling hook, a really nice 1986 Hawk. The boots and legs on mine are not in a good enough shape for what I want in my collection, so I'm looking for him, but I don't really need his accessories. I'm looking for a regular release Lifeline waist and his pistol. So I could buy a whole new Lifeline if I see a nice one, but if I see one with a waist intact and like the rescue on his leg is nicked up or his boots are nicked up, that's okay. I really just need the waist. I've been finding more and more of my G.I. Joes who have like broken in storage. They're getting brittle. It's kind of scary. I'm also looking for the 1987 Crocmaster tube that goes from his shoulder to his mouth. I really want the mask piece to Freefall's helmet from 1990. And I'm also looking for a baton from my 1985 and my 1986 Sergeant Slaughter. This is not an exhaustive list of the accessories I need, but this is so I have a focus point. There's an NJCC coming up, New Jersey Collectors Convention, and I'm hoping Kevin Watts is going to be a vendor there. He told me last time if I brought my list, he would sit with me, basically, and try and, like, finish off stuff. He always has a ton of parts to sell, and last time I was there and just, like an idiot, didn't know what I needed. So I may try and target a ton of G.I. Joe accessories coming up in the not-too-distant future, which would be great to cross a bunch of those off. Another reason to be excited for NJCC, Carson from 3D Joe's is going to be there with his hardcover omnibus. I'm going to get my book signed, but if you didn't order one and you want to get your hands on one, it's a really great opportunity to do so. Plus, it's great always to get to talk to Carson. And while I'm talking about G.I. Joe, guys, Cobra Convergence, the fan community event in July, is gonna be off the hook this year. Hooded Cobra Commander, who kind of organizes that event, is really pulling out all the stops, working really hard behind the scenes to try and get the roster of people together, get this event planned out. It should be super exciting. He's gonna do some cool stuff related to Joe Fest, and I'm just looking forward to seeing what everyone creates for their videos. So I have a few new to the collection items that I found at the thrift store. Nothing super insane, but just some kind of fun stuff that I stumbled upon. Ultraman kind of caught my eye. This is Mebius, I believe. I like Ultraman. I like a lot of kaiju stuff, but I don't really keep up with it. But he's a good-looking figure, one of those classic Bandai vinyl-type guys that basically just moves with the arms. Somebody must have been a kaiju fan because there was a squishy stress reliever Godzilla, so you can take your aggression out on Godzilla. His neck's a little bit split. He's been squeezed a fair amount, but he's pretty fun and cute and super deformed, and thought that was hilarious. I found 2 SPD Power Rangers, so we've got the Red Ranger in his like SWAT armor version, as well as, is this the Omega Ranger? I believe that's what he was called. The white and blue souped up Power Ranger from SPD. And the last thing I picked up at the thrift store is a villain from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, The Next Mutation. It's the Dragon Lord. He's a pretty cool looking action figure. Even if you don't know what he's from, he just looks like he could be fighting the X-Men or maybe a Masters of the Universe type bad guy. He's got this big flowing robe, spikes on his armor, scales on his legs and arms, and sort of like a ghostly looking face there. He's got kind of a mask on. But I thought he was a cool looking figure. I don't really collect Next Mutation as a line overall. I couldn't pass up on him for the thrift store price. If there's a vintage toy line that you're trying to focus on this year and try and clean up your act a little bit on tying up loose ends, let me know in the comments down below. I'm working on Bionic 6 as well as some other stuff. But I want to hear what you guys are collecting these days. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really does help the channel. Leave a comment. All those interactions help YouTube to determine this video is worth sharing with somebody else. So I appreciate that. If you want to support the channel further financially, you can always consider joining us on Patreon. But if nothing else, thanks for hanging on the peg with me.